Good morning, everyone, and good morning to everyone at home. Thank you for being here. I would like to call our special Board of Aldermen meeting for May 26, 2021. If please rise, we will have our invocation by Reverend Lowe Davis, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. Almighty, most merciful, and most beneficent God, we are so grateful, and we praise you for the many, many blessings that you bestow on this city and all who live, work, and visit here. We ask now for your guidance that we may make good and right decisions for all. Amen. Pledge allegiance.
Thank you, Reverend Davis. I'd like to call on our developmental specialist and city planner, Thomas Lloyd, to introduce our informational program today concerning the survey of the wastewater assets and water assets that we have in the city. And this should be very informative for us, and we've received a grant for this, and now this is part of that process. So thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as the mayor said, we did receive a grant for this back in 2018. We did have some delays due to the pandemic with finishing this project. So we are to a finishing point here. We got this grant through the Division of Water Infrastructure, and as the mayor said, one of the conditions for that grant is presenting it to the governing board and then adopting a resolution adopting the asset management plan. So some of you may remember that we did this for the sewer system back in 2018. So this is the same asset management plan for the water. So for our consultants, we have Alan Serkin with the Cape Fear Council of Governments, and he is the executive director of the Cape Fear Council of Governments. And we also have Jean Klein, and she is the regional planner with our neighbors at the Lumber River Council of Governments. So I'll let Alan take it from here, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Do I have to hold it in? Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Thomas. Mr. Mayor, members of the Board of Aldermen, happy to be with you today. My name is Alan Serkin. As Thomas said, I'm the Executive Director of the Cape Fear Council of Governments, and we've been working really for the last couple of years with a COVID delay, as he mentioned, on this water system asset management plan for you guys. As Thomas mentioned, Jean Klein from the Lumber River Council of Governments is with me here today. She is our partner in this project and a sub-consultant of the Council of Governments, and really an expert in all things water and sewer, and that is why we've brought her in as a consultant, sub-consultant on this project. So a little bit of background. First I'll go through what asset management is and the process we used in this process. And so again, as was mentioned, the city was awarded a $65,000 Asset Inventory and Assessment, or AIA, grant from the Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Water Infrastructure in 2018 to develop this water system asset management plan. And the purpose of the plan is to create the city's first ever comprehensive inventory of your water system assets, to develop the first complete GIS database of those assets, to assess the condition of those assets and report on those, the condition of those assets, and then to make recommendations to you, the elected board, on future decisions you might need to make about maintaining and operating your system. So as we mentioned, the consulting team is the Cape Fear Council of Governments and the Lumber River Council of Governments. The Cape Fear Council of Governments was primarily responsible for project management and taking the lead on the asset inventory and the mapping component of this project. And we brought Gene in to assist with the condition assessment, the financial plan, and really crafting the bulk of the paper document, the asset management plan that I will leave with you guys today. So what is asset management? Asset management is the practice of managing infrastructure capital assets, so we're managing our assets in order to minimize the total cost of owning and operating those assets, to prolong the useful life of those assets, so that you can deliver the desired level of service to your customers. And I think it's important to take a moment to consider this. The purpose of the asset management planning is to minimize your total cost. We're going to be getting into some recommendations later on that are going to sound a little bit like we're trying to maximize your total cost. But in reality, the truth is that these assets have a useful life, and they're most effective during their useful life. And as they exceed their useful life, they start to cost more and more to own, to operate, and to maintain. And so, I think, another thing to keep in mind, sewer assets are just a tiny bit more visible because you can see manholes and lift stations around town. The water assets are really pretty invisible. Other than the hydrants, there's really no, and from time to time there might be a valve. There are very few above ground assets. They really are out of sight, out of mind. Does also make our job a lot harder when we're trying to find the location of these assets and the condition of the assets. But they're out of sight, out of mind, but I think when we talk about this delivering the desired level of service to your customers, everybody, you and all of the citizens and all of your customers expect that when you turn the tap, you're going to have clean, healthy drinking water all the time. And that really is the purpose, of course, of providing the water system that you have. So a little bit about the process. So the first thing we did is we identify, we inventory, and we map the water system assets. So that includes the mains, the hydrants, the valves, the interconnections, because you guys are customers of Brunswick County. You buy your water from Brunswick County. You're not a water producer anymore. And so those interconnections, and then as well the water meters. Now, you guys provide us with a file of the water meters and their location. So we're really just mapping the water meters, but we are mapping those so that your staff are aware of the location of all of those water meters. Particularly now that you've got radio read meters and they don't have to visit the meters every month like they used to have to do. And in inventorying those assets, we're identifying the location of the asset, the size of the asset, the material, when it was installed, and any kind of connectivity, the physical layout of the system, what connects to what and how the system is laid out. Each asset is then assigned a unique identifier so that the staff can identify each particular segment of pipe or each particular valve or hydrant by a unique ID. We assess the condition of these assets, and this requires a significant amount of interaction with your staff, and they have been extremely helpful in this process. And in assessing the condition, we're looking at the age, we're looking at the use, the expected useful life of that particular type of asset, and what the likelihood of failure is for that asset. And we conduct a risk assessment. And so that's the question of, if this particular asset were to fail, what is the impact to the system? So the asset management plan includes a list of all the high-risk assets that are identified in the water system. There's a capital improvement plan to help you identify the necessary investments that are required to maintain the operations of the system. There's an operation and maintenance plan review, and a rate review as well. Something to keep in mind, an asset management plan is always a work in progress from a number of different reasons. One is that your staff is always working on the system. So this is a snapshot in time, and presumably there have been modifications and updates even since we started doing the analysis and stopped collecting locational information and inventorying the assets. But also, the reality is that we developed this this map and this list of assets from paper maps, from CAD files from developers, from old maps, and a lot of it from documenting what's in the head of your staff. And certainly there are assets that we missed, and so this is a work in progress because it's going to need to be maintained, it's going to need to be updated. There will be changes, additions, things will be replaced, lines will be, you'll have line breaks that will need to be improved, and fixed. And so this is always going to be a work in progress, and I guess now is as good a time as any to let you know that part of this process is that we've developed an app for their tablets where they can make updates and basically notify the Council of Governments who's maintaining this data for you that, we found something new that should be located in this location, or we've replaced this asset, and so now the installation date is, today, and the material is no longer cast iron, it's now PVC, or something along those lines. So the asset management plan is also, it's a formal cataloging and organizing of all of your system information. And I just mentioned it, but a lot of the stuff that's in this asset management plan comes from the knowledge of your staff. That's very difficult for them to pass down from one staff member to another, and also from old maps that we've scanned or otherwise been able to leaf through to figure out what's going on in your system. And so it really is a great opportunity to collect all the various sources of information into one place. And an asset management plan is a real valuable resource to help you guys plan for and support the necessary improvements to the system. And I will say, part of that is that completing an asset management plan gets you points when you're applying for grants with the Department of Environmental Quality to actually make some of the improvements that are needed to be made. Your application will be more competitive because you have an asset management plan, and that's a really an important component to being able to make some of the improvements that you'll need to make. So I'm going to go over now some details of the mapping component. We'll give you some examples of some of the maps and some of the formats in which the mapping data is available. So this is an overview of your water system map. It summarizes the major components of your water system. The extent of the system, you can see that primarily it's within the incorporated city limits, which is the gray areas. But also you've got water customers that are not in the city limits. You've got some in the ETJ. And so, the extent of the system, the line materials, these lines in this map are colored by the different materials. So the green lines are PVC. The orange lines are asbestos cement. The maroon lines are asbestos cement. The orange lines are cast iron. The blue lines are ductile iron. And I think it's just one purple line is high density polypropylene. And as well is what is mapped is the three interconnections with the Brunswick County system where your water sources are. And so all of that is on your overview map, which is included in the asset management plan. As well, we created a paper atlas, which I brought with me today, and I'm going to hand off to Tom and his team at the end of the presentation. And if you guys want to leaf through this when I'm done with the presentation, I encourage you to. This is a 42 by 30 inch, 18-page map atlas at a scale of 1 inch to 100 feet. And it's got aerial photography as a background. Each asset is labeled with an asset ID. The mains, and I'll move on to this is an example of an entire page Here's sort of a zoom in, and I apologize, the screen capture is not very high resolution, but the map itself is very high resolution. You've got the mains are labeled by material. Let's see if I can get my pointer. So the mains are labeled with their asset ID, the material and size and year of installation is labeled, so at a quick glance the staff can know what's underground, how old it is, what size it is. The hydrants are all labeled with an ID. The valves are all labeled with an ID. The interconnections are labeled. The meter locations are all shown. And as well, for reference, not only do we have the aerial photography, we've got parcel lines, address points, and street names. So it's a really valuable tool for your staff to be able to bring out into the field and sit down over a paper map and really just flip through and get a good understanding of the extent of the system. We've also created a web map from the digital information. This is a screenshot of the web map, and the web map does not have all of the labeling that the paper maps have, but what the web map has is that it's interactive. And so you click on an asset, like you can see the blue outline on this segment of pipe is selected, and the pop-up map pops up to say that it is, asset ID WMEL03. It is in map panel D3 on the atlas. If you want to look it up in paper, it's a 6-inch PVC pipe that's approximately 333 feet long on East Leonard Street. It predates 1974, and the location and information about that was sourced from the Water Sewer Extension Project as-built from 1974. So, your staff can select on that and can find out a number of details about each of the assets. And there's also an app that your staff can download, and in fact, when Adam was here, when Adam and I were talking before the meeting, he was saying he's already got the water map loaded up. It's fantastic. He brought it up on his tablet and showed me. He said he uses it all the time. It's really a fantastic asset. The app that you use is a free app. It does require a login and Southport credentials, so this is not information that's available to the public. It can be if you would like it to be, but as of right now, it's locked down so that only employees who have password protection credentials are allowed to access this information. I personally don't have a tablet, so these are screenshots from my phone, but this is an example of what it can look like. And when you click on a point, like I clicked on the Yopon Extension Vault interconnection, it tells me that that's the name of it. It gives me the address of the vault. It tells me we're at map panel C4 on the atlas. It tells us the water meter that's at that location, and if you scroll down, which obviously this isn't interactive and you can't, it says, information about the water mains that are in that location, etc. So a really valuable tool that your staff is already employing, and so we're happy to be able to provide that to you guys. So that is the extent of my presentation, and I'm going to turn it over now to Jean, who is going to give you more details about the analysis that we did.
Hi. Left or right to advance? Right. Okay. So, on a drinking water system, when you're doing the analysis, the first thing you have to take a look at is what is the source of the water. And there are two main sources of water. You can either pull it, well, if you're pulling water itself, you can either pull it from the ground in wells, or you can pull it from a run-of-river source, like the big surface water source. And there are all kinds of regulations that govern both of those. You were a well water system for many years, like most other jurisdictions in eastern North Carolina. But some years ago, you all collaborated with Brunswick County, and now you are purchasing your surface water. So I've got just a few pieces of information about that that are important to keep in mind as we go through this. So the technical term for what you are now is a purchase water only system. There are some systems that combine. They do some purchasing and then they do some production on their own. There's always the question about mixing two types of water. It's certainly possible, but it takes a good chemist to do that. So you are a purchase water only system, and you are currently contracted with Brunswick County to supply both the water that you need for your daily sales, but also for the storage that you're required to have. And most towns, as you know, have their storage in the air, right? It's an elevated storage tank. But you don't need your storage in the air here. So Brunswick County operates on ground storage and elevated. Your water does come through the Smithville tank, so it is an elevated source. And the deal with an elevated storage tank just basically is that the height of it is indexed to the amount of pressure that needs to be put on the water to move it over a certain distance. So that's why you see elevated tanks at different heights. You know, you take into consideration the ground elevation, which is basically 0 here, right? And then you build your tank up based on how far you need to move water. So your responsibility, since you're a purchase water system, is pretty well focused on managing the distribution system. So that is all your lines, the assets that Alan talked about, the water lines and valves, the hydrants and the hydrant valves. Those are your responsibilities to maintain and repair and replace when they get to the point that they need to be replaced. This is a little bit about Brunswick County's system. On the left is a map of how they divide their service areas in the county, and you are in that green area down at the bottom. And on the right is a picture of a new filtration system that has gone in, is in the process of being put in at 211 Water Treatment Facility. You are currently contracted by the records I had for 1.418 million gallons a day. And that is to cover your average day use without any problem, your max day use, which typically occurs in the summer when you have more water demand because you've got more people here, and the required storage. So there were, this is a graph of 2 years of daily use by the system. And the blue line is the average daily use. The red line that starts in about January of 2020 is max day. So before January of 2020, you were reporting just one quantification of water. You really need to report both because you kind of need to know, like on an average day, I know I can cover it, but what's my max day? Because I've got to be able to cover it. So you can see that there's a seasonal curve to your demand, and that even inside that seasonal demand, the demand for water goes up and down during those periods. All right, let's talk about what we found in the inventory. So when I started looking at the water lines, it occurred to me that it might be helpful to take a look at it from the perspective of start to finish and talk about what was done at the initiation of the system and then big investments over time that have been made. So that's what this chart shows. The date for the water system is 1915. And so that first column is about 38,000 linear feet of cast iron line. That was the initial investment, all right? And then in those subsequent years, 1920 to 1949, 1950 to 59, 1960 to 69, there wasn't a lot of investment there, but there was some. So in those periods, the town was initiating some expansions on that original system. But then in the 70s, there was a significant investment in lines. And those were initiated by the town as well. I couldn't find if there was any, like any loan or grant funding that subsidized that, but there could have been. But that column is 61,000 linear feet, and that's your biggest investment of line came in the decade of the 70s. You extended water on Lord and on Howe, and you extended it out to 11, and you did a bunch of the Atlantic, a bunch of streets where you just clearly expanded the reach of the system. That pipe investment is primarily PVC. Some asbestos cement, but primarily PVC. And then in the years from 1980 until the present, most of the investment's been done by developers, not necessarily on the town's dollar. And those investments have all been PVC or ductile iron when they needed to have an iron component. So hard to see, but a really cool map. And Tom has it at his office. If you ever have a chance, go by and look at it. It is the map of the original water system. And so you can clearly see, that original grid pattern, and you have cast iron that was installed in 1915 that's still in use today in your downtown area. So that being the case, when you look across all the water line that you have, I asked Tom this question, so what's the most problematic line? What gives you the most heartache? What gives you the most maintenance calls? And according to Tom, and I totally agree with this, I thought maybe he'd say some asbestos cement, but he didn't. He said small diameter cast iron line close to the surface. And you can see in this bottom left picture exactly what happens to cast iron over time. Cast iron corrodes from the inside and from the outside. And eventually it just becomes paper thin and collapses. And I would guess that most every cast iron line that you have, while it was installed at a time when that was the only pipe type, right? That was the only thing going. That was the only ride to take. And it's thick, and it has done its job. It has more than done its job. It has been in the ground much longer and in service much longer than its useful life period. And so all of the water system in the downtown area, not unlike the sewer system in the downtown area that you're addressing part of now, is in need of change out. The other thing I'd mention before I come off this is you have a really significant inventory of small diameter lines. Now, are you different from any other system because of that? No. Every system I've ever worked with has 1-inch lines or 2-inch lines because they were easy to run and they were cheap, But they are undersized because the minimum permitted diameter for a water line is 6 inches. So you have a sizable inventory. I think it's about 17% of your total pipe inventory is less than 6 inches. And you're going to see us address that in the recommendations. So this is a chart that summarizes what we found in terms of the distribution lines. And this is a pretty cool chart because it gives you the diameter and the material. So this is a bar chart. So the longest bar there, which is the second from the top, is 6-inch PVC. So the majority pipe type in your system is a great pipe type. All of the growth that's happened outside of the downtown core is in pretty good shape because of the pipe material that's in the ground. It's the cast iron in the main area, and then some asbestos cement water lines plugged in various places that are really the points of vulnerability. Waterline valves. One of the things that we said we would do as a part of this project is to locate and assess valves. And I think that Alan and the young woman that worked on data gathering for this project did a really good job working with Tom and his staff to take a look at where the valves are located and then tag them to a line, because whatever the line install date is, more than likely the valve date will match. So there were 257 valves that were inventoried. The newest valve that we had a record of was installed in 2016. The portion that is very poor, you have some very poors in this category, are tied to age, because you've got a few valves that we believe are still circa 1915, and then several circa 1940. And the industry standard for the useful life on a valve is 35 years. So clearly that those have been exceeded. Water hydrants. Through working with Tom, we were able to get data from the fire department on water hydrants. And of course, this is important from a fire protection perspective, but it's also critical to understanding and being able to gauge pressure on your system at various points. So in the fire, well, I call them fire hydrants and probably always will, in the water hydrant inventory, there were 224 that we inventoried. And I will say this, I used a useful life period of 60 years. Now the industry standard is 45 to 60 years. So by using 60, I was pretty generous, you know, in terms of, you know, I might have softened the look for you all on fire hydrants by using that higher useful life number. There were only 1% of the inventory that would be categorized as in excellent condition, and that would mean that they would have been installed in the last 5 years. About 5.4% are in fair or average condition, 35% are in good condition, and only 10% are in poor or very poor condition. And again, those are the oldest hydrants in the system. Water meters, here's a success story for you. And I have said in here, and I've said in the report, you are to be commended for your investment in water meters. We collected information from the folks at City Hall and were able to index those by the type of customer on the water system. And so that's what this pie chart shows. So residential is clearly your majority sector. That's 88% of your water meters are tied to a customer that's identified as being residential. 11% are tied to customers identified as commercial. And then here's another thing for you all to be commended for, is that you include your city-owned inventory. So why is that important? Well, you use water. You use water every day in what you do in managing the system. Sometimes you need to blow off a hydrant. Sometimes you need water for various reasons. But your city-owned facilities, the city building, this building, the fire department, are all metered. So while you don't pay yourself, right, for the use, you are able to zero in on the amount of usage that's attributable to city-owned facilities. And when you're looking at doing calculations on use, you can parse out city-owned easily. And so that's another thing. Thank you. That was a great idea, whoever's idea that was. Your investment in water meters and the type of meter that you selected to put in the ground is pretty phenomenal by everything that I have been able to find out. You have a system that is now 100% new meters, all installed, majority in 2016, but some in years, since then. And you have also incorporated a leak detection element in there, and that is just really, that was a fine investment. And I have yet to see that in any other system that I have been working in the counties on the coast. Now that is a typical investment in a Raleigh or a Cary or a Charlotte, right? The big urban systems. But you all have done yourself a tremendous service by doing it, because now you can keep track of your usage at any point in time. And you will understand and know ahead of the time that a leak might even occur where a line is echoing or vibrating to indicate that it's coming loose at the joint or that it's fractured. So it being the case that you have such a significant cast iron inventory in the downtown area, having this is a real bonus. Okay, so when I analyzed all that, what did I find? Probably the most important part, other than for the system just to get the inventory done, to have in one place all of the assets, is to do a risk analysis. And what you do is you compare and assign values based on, for every asset, what is its likelihood of failure from none because it's brand new, right? Or extremely likely because it's very old, it's in the ground past its useful life period. You index the likelihood with the consequence. So what's the consequence of failure? Is it mild? Is it moderate? Is it catastrophic? Here's an example. You have a lot of undersized water lines, right? But what's the consequence of failure of any one of those 1-inch or 2-inch lines? Very little, unless they run for days and nobody does anything about it. But the consequence of failure of a 1-inch or a 2-inch line is far different than the consequence of a 12-inch line or a 10-inch line, where you don't have the capacity internally, as most places don't, to manage a line break on a 10-inch or a 12-inch line. You'd have to call somebody in to do that repair. So you do that kind of like, what's the likelihood and what's the consequence, and then you come out with an assessment. And I did that for each category. And so the one I picked is water lines. So the consequence of failures on the left axis, and likelihood of failure goes along the top. And red is catastrophic on consequence, and likelihood, the red is very high. So the 55,847 linear feet of line that sit in that category are your highest point of vulnerability. So what this does is help you narrow down on where strategically do I need to make investments. Yes, I have a lot of undersized lines, and that's painful, but we can address those over time as we do other projects. But if I've got large diameter line that's vulnerable, and the consequence of failure of that is catastrophic, that's where I need to zero in some attention. So this is done on each one of the asset groups. And then that's all combined and put into a list of high-risk assets. So we inventoried 82 assets or asset groups, and 39 of 82 have been identified as high risk. And the reason for that, I mean, that's, you know, roughly half, is because of the age of the lines that you've got in the system that are, you know, they pull very quickly into the high-risk category. So you've, in the report, and then, of course, in the digital copy that you'll have access to, this high-risk asset list is one that you should refer to as you begin to think about what kind of improvements you are able to take or need to take on the water system. The other piece that's in here that's very important, and it's a pullout. So you now have a capital improvement plan for your drinking water system, which parallels the one you have on your wastewater system. And the CIP is what everybody calls it. It's the acronym, obviously, is a plan for scheduling the investments, for financing the investments, and then implementing those projects. And it's set up on a 10-year horizon. So we look really closely at the first 5 years, and then we group the years 6 through 10. We look closely at years 1 through 5 because that's where you've either got backlog needs that you need to deal with, or needs that are coming up in the near future that are going to be, you know, that need to be assessed and dealt with. What the capital improvement plan allows you to do as the decision makers, because you all are the point of decision making on investment for Southport, is decide when and where and how to address the CIP projects. One of the things about this CIP that I need to mention is this. When you secure the funding from DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, for these asset inventory projects, one thing that they will not allow you to consider in the CIP is future growth needs, because their lens is on what's in the ground now, what the vulnerability is now, and fixing that. So this CIP addresses all of that very clearly. But I'm putting this in here because the other part of the picture for you all is that you are in a physical location where you have an economic driver out that window that will always put you in a position of being able to foster growth. And the question is how you do that in your infrastructure system. So these are population graphs. The one on the left is 1970 to 2010. And you can see it was, you know, it tipped up in 1990, then dropped back down, and now in 2010 was headed decidedly up. The second is the last 10 years, 2010 to 2019. 2019 population figures are the last available good population numbers. You'll hear the 2020 population is blah, blah, blah. Well, if you really want to zero in, you need to go to the 2019 figures because they're certified. So your population is definitely on a trajectory up. So why is that important? Well, you're going to have extension requests. You know, you're going to have expansion needs that are going to have to be addressed. You're going to have to add additional capacity, storage capacity. I think you're grappling with that right now, because you have to have a certain amount of storage capacity based on what your average daily use is and your max day. So just a mention of that so that you understand what you've got in this CIP is what's in the ground now and needs to be fixed based on the inventory current day. So here's the breakout of the 5 and 10-year capital need. And it's a big figure in this 2021 year, which is on the left. That's $4.8 million. That's the backlogged need, though. That's not just what covers 2021, but it's all the years between 1915 and now where an upgrade, probably should have happened but hasn't. So you've got all that cast iron and all of the valves and the hydrants and all that inventory is stuck in that first year figure. But then if you look in the out years, it's very little, because most of your investment is in treating the needs that have been backlogged. The total 10-year need, based on what we inventoried, is 5.7 million. So think about that. Total 10-year need is 5.7, and we need 4.8 right now. There's not much difference between the two. So pretty clearly, I think your cast iron is where your need is. The CIP projects are in the report and will be in the digital copy, and it's in a table listed like this with the information indexed to it of, what's the consequence of failure, what's the capacity of the asset, is it full-sized or undersized or oversized. So you can kind of, use this again as a gauge of, okay, here's where we need to invest. And the ones that pop to the top of this CIP list are cast iron. And they do that because of their age. There's nothing, it's done by an algorithm. And when the algorithm picks up that age, it just pops it to the top. So this is your list of CIP projects. So let's talk about rates and revenues and expenses as the last thing. Not every asset management plan includes this, but I include it in the ones that I do because I think it's a very important part of the discussion that you all need to have. I've been a town administrator before, so I know what it's like to try and run a shop, and I have worked in local government for 38 years. So understanding rates and being sure that you're looking at the right revenue figure and the right expenditure figures is really important. So first out of the chute, what's your rate now on the water side? So your water rate, you have a residential formula and then you have a commercial formula. So I'm going to concentrate on residential because that's the majority of your customers. Your base rate covers the first 3,000 gallons, right? And that charge is $25.42. And then you have two steps in a stepped, what's called a stepped system, or an increasing block rate structure. Your first step is 3,001 gallons to 10,000. That's a pretty hefty step. And any consumption in that range is $5.84 per 1,000 gallons. And then there's the step of everything else, everything above 10,000. And that is $7.43 per 1,000 gallons. So when you're doing comparisons on rates, the industry standard is to look at 5,000 gallons of consumption per month, because on average, a residential customer consumes 5,000 gallons at least per month. Okay. Now you will have customers in your system that will never hit that because they're single person households, for instance. But on average, and yours is driven by a lot of, people coming in and demanding water and then leaving, right? Your charge for 5,000 gallons to a residential customer inside the city limits is $37.01. So $37.01 per month. The School of Government, the Environmental Finance Center, they started the project back when I was years ago, and they have water rates that have been submitted by communities like yours, and you have been religious in responding to this. So I was able to pull your charge at 5,000 gallons a month from the fiscal year 06-07 all the way to 2021. So that's a 15-year history, all right? So what do you immediately notice about that line? Okay, it's increasing, right? So there's the trend line is that red dotted line. But I think to my eye, because I look at this all the time, is why is that not a good idea? There are many reasons that's not a good idea, but here's the one that I think is the most relevant. Every year, the input prices for everything we do as a municipal organization goes up. Your labor costs go up because your health insurance goes up, and because you want to pay folks a little more each year to encourage them to stay with you over time. All of the inputs for pipe, for all of the maintenance work that has to be done, all of that goes up. Electricity goes up. Then have you ever heard of two dropping rates? I don't think so. I don't think so. So I index the percentage of rate increase per year to the CPI for that year. Just to make this point, in the years where you choose not to gently raise your rates, you are eating all of that additional cost. And there is only a certain tolerance that a system has for how much of that it can eat or absorb before the well runs dry, so to speak. So, what is the best kind of rate increase to make? A gentle one. At least a 2% or 3% increase a year, because your customers, the majority of them, will hardly notice that. But it gives you that cushion of having protected yourself from the increases in all of your input costs. Rather than waiting and not doing a rate increase and not doing a rate increase and not doing a rate increase, and then all of a sudden you have an emergency project that you need to take care of, and you have got a whole system in this town of ticking time bomb type lines that are going to have to be addressed at some point soon. You don't want to fall, you don't want to lag behind, not now. So again, is raising rates fun? No, it's not. Is it the responsible thing to do? Absolutely. What is your job? To manage the town responsibly and to prepare for the future. And you are lucky, you are so lucky compared to most of the systems that I work with that are inland and small and poor and have nothing but their backs up against the wall. You have an economic driver right there. You have the history of this town that you need to build on and support, and that will always make you different from those small rural communities that I'm typically dealing with. So on a last kind of way to look at rates is the ability to pay. And this is something that every funder is going to look at, whether you go to USDA or you go to one of the state sources. Everybody's going to calculate an ability to pay. And so what they do is this. They look at your median household income, which is the one in the middle there. And your median household income for 2021 is $52,917. And then they calculate your current rate of $37.10. What percentage is that of the $52,917? Less than 1%. It's 0.84%. The USDA, at a minimum, wants to see 2% or 3%, because you can't take care of the ongoing maintenance needs of managing a system unless you have the resource available to make the purchases and make the investment to keep the system up and running over time. So you have some leeway there in terms of affordability. And if you try to apply for grant right now without having made a change in your rates, you probably won't get any grant because you just are not hitting close to the affordability threshold. And then last thing is revenues and expenditures for water. I've worked with Melanie Trexler on this, and I want to say a couple of words about it. I used the audit information, the last 3 completed audit years, and I looked at every expense that was tagged to water. Interesting way that your audit is done, and I think it reflects the way that the accounting is being done, according to my conversation with Melanie. Your revenues are broken out. On the revenue side, you have a sewer set of revenues, and then you have a set of water revenues. So get a real clear picture, right? But your expenditures are combined. So somebody's got to sit and parse through those and pull out, and so that's what I did, was to the greatest extent possible, so that we could get a picture for today of what it would be if your water system was forced to stand on its own. And your water system could stand, and does stand. That blue line at the top is your operating revenues. The red line is your operating expenditures. So you've got a nice cushion between those two. Is the cushion enough to take on debt service for a loan, the magnitude that you will need? No, it's not. So don't look at that and say, oh, we don't have to raise our rates. Because you are seriously going to have to think about adjusting your rates. But it is a good thing, because it is, it shows that you've got some tolerance there between the two. But when you group sewer in with water, and you combine the revenues for water and sewer, you are operating dangerously close to a break even or below, and you can't be there. So what's effectively happening is that any buffer on the water side is being absorbed on the sewer side. So here are our recommendations. And as this says, these are recommendations, but you all have to decide, are you going this way, are you going this way, are you going another way? Recommendation number 1, due to the age, condition, and strategic value, the city should plan for replacement of the cast iron lines in the system. This would include valve change-outs and any other additions that might be needed. The inventory of cast iron lines and valves has served well beyond its useful life period. And every day that you're operating with those on the ground is a blessing. But that day is going to end. And if it ends tragically, that will be awful. And then the second one underneath it is just a shout out to the undersized lines. You do have a tremendous amount of undersized lines. As I talked about before, those are not of the highest consequence because they just, if they break, it's a 1-inch line. You're not going to lose that much water, and that could be repaired by your town staff, as opposed to a large diameter line where you're losing hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. Recommendation 2. While water loss is not a current significant problem, and I'll give a shout out to the meter selection that you made on that one, the city has numerous aged and failed or failing lines that could cause water loss problems at any point. You need to continue to monitor those through your new metering system and take actions as you need to reduce those losses when they occur. Recommendation 3, your valves have been located and mapped, and that is a wonderful thing. However, we suspect, as does Tom and his staff, that there are other valves in the system that have not yet been discovered because they weren't mapped on an old map, and we don't know that they're there yet. So as those are discovered, they need to be entered into the map system to show, hey, we found this is where it is, this is the diameter, and we need to add this to the inventory. Also, you need to continue and really beef up your valve exercise program. That's something that DEQ is going to be looking more closely at on water systems from what I am able to understand. Recommendation 4, continued attention should be paid to water use. Since the city is a purchase water customer of Brunswick County, water use is very important to track to make sure that you've got a sufficient capacity, but also to ensure that you're guarding against water loss. Because any amount of water that you lose, Brunswick County doesn't care. It went through the meter and you're going to pay the full ride for it. So it's really important to keep track on water loss. And I think, again, from my perspective, that's why the cast iron is worrisome to me, because that is just kind of a ticking time bomb. Recommendation 5, an annual assessment of water rates and the sufficiency of revenues to cover your operating expenses and your operation, your maintenance, and your existing and future debt service should become a regular practice. And I'll give a shout out to the city as well. I was talking with Ms. Lara before the meeting, and she indicates that you have a rate committee and that you are, you're actively looking at these types of questions. And I definitely want to commend you for that because you need to. And it's good because you stay ahead. It's always better to get ahead of a problem. It's always better to get ahead. All right, that's it. I do want to thank everybody that was associated with, and I think Alan, would certainly join me in this. We started working with Bruce Oakley as the manager, and now manager's Gordon Hargrove. So we thank you for your leadership. We thank the board. We've worked with David Fox as the Public Works Director. I understand that he's getting ready to retire, and that somebody here will be moving into that position. And I want to give a special shout out from my perspective to Tom Stanley, because he's a gem. Tom is a gem, and I'm not blowing smoke. I have worked with public works directors all over this state, and Tom is a good man. Part of the reason Tom is a good man is because he's honest, and Tom is always going to shoot straight with you. And you need to be glad that that is the case. You might not always like what he's saying, but be grateful that somebody is telling you the way it is. And then Thomas Lloyd, I think, was Alan's primary contact. And Melanie Trexler, I just want to give a shout out to her too for helping with the financial information. Alan, is there anything you want to say to wrap up?
Well, I did want to say, we probably left Adam off the list. I mean, Adam was also very helpful in this process. So big thanks to him as well. And there is one thing that's not in the presentation I did want to mention. And back on this slide, when Gene was talking about, adding the valves to the asset inventory, and I mentioned to you guys that we have this app where your staff can add that stuff. I also wanted to add that one of the sort of conditions of receiving an asset management plan grant is that you are expected to maintain this inventory of assets that was really, a Herculean effort on part of staff. But in order for it to have lasting value, the funding agency expects you to continue to use that. And so honestly, I forgot to look before I came. I know when we finished the sewer asset management plan, you guys had a contract with the Council of Governments to continue to maintain that database. And I don't remember if we wrote it broadly enough to include water and sewer. I feel like we did, because you already had the sewer, the water grant when we did that contract. But I'm going to need to look back at that contract. We may need to review that contract. I don't remember what the contract term was or anything like that. Obviously there's a sewer project happening right now in town. There are always going to be little water and sewer projects where things are going to get upgraded, and obviously it's important to stay on top of that, and that was going to serve you very well in the future. And so with that, we'll just open it up to any questions that you guys might have. Or maybe you need to digest this for me before you want.
It's a lot to take in.
And I'm sorry if I should know this or should have heard it and didn't, but if we change out all of these cast iron lines, does that mean we have to dig up the streets again? Are you nodding? Oh, no.
They are underground.
Well, yeah, but are they, we've just gone through and are continuing to go through a lot of traffic turmoil, et cetera, because of the sewer project. Will we have to go back and do this over again?
So perhaps we should ask Tom to speak to that. Tom? Yes. If you were to take on a water project to replace the cast iron, I know that there's a separation requirement both vertically and horizontally from a sewer line to a water line. I assume that in order to probably what would happen on the cast iron is that it would just be left and parallel. Why dig it up unless that's what you decide you want to do? But in order to do that, you would be in another part of the road, right?
Absolutely. The biggest problem with water is as you replace water, unlike sewer project where Good morning. With the sewer project going on, we're able to replace the old sewer line with newer sewer lines as the sewer line is still being bypassed. Unfortunately, with replacing active water lines, it's not as easy to bypass because you have customers who are actually attached to the water line. When installing new water lines, obviously you have to dig up, whether it be in the road, the sidewalk, and the shoulder of the road. You have to dig it up, lay them, pressure test them, chlorinate them, bacteria samples before you can make it active. So you're either paralleling the existing water line or placing it in another part of the road or the other side of the road. And then once the line is replaced, tested, accepted, then you have to go back, dig up, and install water services. It's the same process that's going on with the sewer right now, except you can't do it. It can't be an immediate switch over like the sewer line is. So water line is definitely a much bigger process. It would depend on what project you're starting. And I know nobody wants to hear this, but the first step would be, again, the main corridor, like we're doing with the sewer line. The first water lines that would need to be replaced, in my opinion, would be our feeders, which is down House Street and East Moore Street, East and West Moore Street. Those would be the two lines that would need to be replaced first. Adam, would you agree with that?
Let me just say, I have to imagine, Gene mentioned the horizontal and vertical separation. You probably think we're digging up the streets now, are we really going to do it again? But in almost every case, the water line's on the other side of the street from the sewer line, right? It's not like you can do these together.
No, it's not. It's not. Very few places anywhere would they be done together. There's a 10-foot horizontal separation between water lines and sewer lines, and or 18-inch vertical separation. Yes, Mark.
They're on the side of the road. They're to the side.
They're normally, for the most part, they're on the side of the road. There's places in House Street, starting at 12th Street. It's on the right-hand side of the road. As you get closer to the fire department and then up towards Napa, it's in the middle of the road. And then it shoots back, once you get up to closer to Leonard Street side, it gets on the right-hand side of the road under the sidewalk. And then at Brown Street, it crosses the road towards the towards the water tank and runs under the sidewalk. So there's a whole lot of different variables to where it may be.
One thing that's worth considering about that, though, is as we mentioned, if you're replacing the line, you're just going to parallel it. You can put it on the side of the road. If the water line under the middle of House Street breaks, he's digging up the middle of House Street to repair it. If you beat it to the punch and build your replacement line to the side of the road, you're not digging up the middle of the road. You just abandon it and leave it under the middle of House Street.
Do I hear you saying that it's possible that we could do this without detours and disrupting traffic and access?
Not
Please
even close.
Say yes.
Not even close. They're not even close.
Tom, if we are going to do this before we have to go back next year and mill and resurface that whole stretch that we're digging up, I think that's the time we should think about doing it. Before we have to do that. No?
Well,
Because then we'd have to do it again. Would you know what I'm saying? Would they want us?
But, I mean, realistically, we're not going to be doing this anytime soon.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's going to be, it'd take,
Right.
if we had the money, it would take a couple of years, wouldn't it? To even do the engineering and get that project teed up and ready to go.
it would take some time and some planning. Absolutely. There's no way we could do it before we milled and paved. I mean, if we were going to do that, we should have done it. Well, I mean, it wasn't possible, obviously, but it should have been done at the same time if that was their thought. We have this is kind of scary. It's reality, but we actually run a good system. It's old, it's fragile, but we're not repairing, and maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but we're not making repairs every day on this water line. So don't let the reality of this freak you out, because our system is a decent system. Obviously, anything could happen, but most of our breaks are service line connections, old service line connections, and there are times when the galvanized or the cast iron pipe does rust through and create holes. So I don't think we're in danger of a geyser anytime soon all over town, but it is aged, antiquated, and absolutely we'll need some attention. There are places that need attention.
during the sewer asset management plan that, you know, you have a beautiful historic community with an aged historic utility system. And it sort of, you know, kind of comes with the territory. It's a beautiful community, but, you know, the historic homes are attached to historic infrastructure. And it just sort of, you know, comes with the territory. As Gene said, you know, the great news is that, you know, your community can afford this better than other communities in very similar circumstances. Not saying it's easy, and not saying, not saying that people, you know, want to, but, you know, Gene's right. There are a lot of communities inland that have no economic development activity, that are, you know, above that 2% threshold. People are paying a lot for their utilities, and they're not putting any money away for capital improvements, so that they're never able to get ahead of the game. So, I mean, you do have opportunity that a lot of places don't have, as difficult as it may be to swallow that pill. Yes, ma'am.
I think just for a point of reference, on the water rates, I'm sorry. For a point of reference on the water rates, your charge for 5,000 gallons to an inside residential customer is $37 and a penny. The highest in the range is $107.60 with a system that has 300 customers. You have over 3,000 customers. So just, you know, count your blessings. You are blessed to be in a place that is much better off than many other places in our state.
Jean, can I ask a question of you of the rate recommendations? It's Laura.
Yes, Laura, hi.
So you're referencing the 5,000 per household scale, and we of course have gone with a 3. So I was wondering, do you recommend that we adjust that to be reflective of what we're seeing at the state, where they're using that 5,000 per customer, household, whatever, as their base kind of thing versus what we've done?
My strongest encouragement to you would be to not base any change in your water rate on what anybody else is doing. Base it on what you need. Yes, that information that the EFC has is great data. And yes, you should look at where other communities are, but don't make your decision based on what they do, because every other system is as unique as you are. You know, it's going to differ in number of customers. It's going to differ in the age of the infrastructure. Your water source is going to be different. You know, it's really hard to make good comparisons by just saying, well, let's see, what does so-and-so charge for water? You know, you can't do it that way. Does that answer your question, Laura?
Well, yes and no. It's not that I'm concerned about what the town of Holden's, you know, charging versus
Right.
Southport. It was more like, what do we make our base unit reflective of? A 3,000 allotment for this amount versus 5,000 for this base amount, because there is those differences, and there was reasons for doing it one way or the other.
Right.
When we created the scale that we did. So
Okay.
that's more what I was getting at, was should the base number be higher to collect more money
Yes.
per residential
you
customer
have-
for
I'm
just
sorry.
having a service line to their property?
Yeah, you've got, there are two pieces to your rate structure. One is the base, right? And that's where you're supposed to recover all of your capital costs, all of your operating. I mean, that is the place. And then your volumetric rate is the cut above that cost that's required to meet your max day. Okay? So the base rate always needs to be set at a level where you are going to recover what you need from the base. And then the volumetric charge is money that it would be great if you could put in a capital reserve fund. You know, that's the optimal opportunity. One of the things that I'd look at, just having a lot of your rate structure, that you might consider going forward is changing the amount of gallons that are covered in the base. You know, leave the rate the same, right? But reduce the amount of gallons that are covered. So you could drop it from 3,000 to 2,000 in 1 year and drop it from 2 to 1,500 or 1,000. There are plenty of examples in the state of systems that you get no gallons in your base rate. There are more examples of that than there are of systems that, you know, give you kind of a grace, you know. And a grace of 3,000 gallons is above the state average. State average is 2,500.
Right, just 1 second. So your suggestion of no, a base rate of no usage, we're in between the proverbial rock and a hard place where, number one, our demographic is growing as a retirement community with 1 or 2 individuals in a house.
Right?
And also the seasonal occupant for a full-time residence. So we're having to have that base rate so high, even though the usage, where we can't promote conservation of water. And so it seems like that flat rate of no water and then incrementing would be.
Actually, I think we could promote conservation more effectively if we had a base rate that included no volumetric charge and an increasing volumetric charge per 1,000 gallons used.
Right. You could expand the
to me.
steps. You know, that would be another recommendation that I think that you should look at. And those are 2 ways, you know, reduce the amount that you give for the base and then put more steps in there. And the way that you index those steps is to do a further study of where your consumption falls. Look at your consumption groupings, because you'll be amazed at how they group out. You know, your average monthly consumption may be less than 5,000. 5,000 is the industry average. I'd be surprised if it's much less than that, because this is kind of a resort community, right? But if you looked at stepping, you know, any volume between 0 gallons and, you know, 1,500 or 3,000, you know, put 3,000 gallons in each step, or 4,000 gallons to meet whatever those groupings are. And that also is a way that you can protect, to some degree, the user that everybody worries about. And that is, you know, the elderly single female resident who, you know, it uses very little water. You'd be surprised. I think most systems that I have worked with think their perception is that they have many more of those than they actually do when you look at the consumption pattern. So looking at your consumption pattern, and not just 1 month, look 12 months so that you catch that seasonal variation. And then think about those 2 ways of, you know, looking at changing your rate structure. Because there are 2 things to rates. There's the structure that they fit in, and then there's the actual rate, right? And you can manipulate the structure while leaving the rate the same. Okay? Thank you.
Question that I think is probably for Tom. Keeping in mind the horror story of Flint, Michigan, they could not afford to fix what they knew was the problem. Do we, anywhere in any place in our entire system, starting at the county, coming to us, have anything like that? Any lead, anything else we should be worried about?
Adam, come address this. Adam does our sampling, and we are in no comparison to anything like Flint, Michigan. I'll tell you that. But Adam can clarify our testing standards.
See some turbidity in their water. Is this something for them to be worried about?
Typically, no, ma'am. Most
Okay.
of the time when there's turbidity like that, it's because somebody's had a high flow, hydrant's been opened. It's typically just sediment in the bottom of the pipeline. And we do run around at the ends of different lines as we test for maximum residence time. And we flow water at a high rate in order to take a sample and also to draw chlorine into those areas. So you will get some of that. Yes, sir.
This is selfish. I noticed Cape Fear Drive was a concrete asbestos line. I would love to come up with a reason for my dysfunction. How do you, when you get readings off of those kind of lines, is that a safe product?
It is. As long as it stays wet, most of the time it's not an issue, and as it's a water line, it's going to stay wet. And it's not going to be broken apart in most cases unless there's some sort of construction. As a matter of fact, I just did a test. It just came back not even a month ago, where I tested at one of our entry points as an asbestos line as well. And it had absolutely no trace of asbestos in the water. So,
I gotta watch out for my mother. She's still
That's
there.
right.
So.
yes, sir.
The dust is the only problem with the asbestos line. As long as it's wet, it's pretty much
That's right.
What's the optimum line? What do we want our lines? The PVC? And the life expectancy, I think she went over it, or someone did.
PVC is 100 years?
That's what we need. Great.
Thanks, everybody. We'll stick around a little bit if you have any one-on-one questions.
Okay. No further questions? Everybody's good? Okay. Yeah, I think this was a marvelous presentation. It's always great to have the Cape Fear Council of Government here. Thank you, Mr. Serkin. Thank you, Ms. Klein. For me, anytime I learn something new, it's a blessing. Every day you need to learn something. And some of the things I learned, and I'm going to go back and watch this meeting because it's worth watching again. And I mean that sincerely, because it's like watching a movie. You see something different the second time you watch it. But one of the things we learned that is something we already knew. Tom Stanley's a good man, but we knew that. We know that the only cast iron we should have is on your stove, right? Never mix water and sewer. We learned that. And that our roads may be disheveled again, and that's okay. That you don't drop your rates, and that you have to plan for the future. And I appreciate this presentation so much because it is looking towards the future and what can we do for our citizens now, but also you added what we can do for citizens of the future. And it's programs like this and how we find a way forward, a better way forward for our citizens and our city. And so I appreciate the attentiveness of the board. Thomas Lloyd, thank you. Adam, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Mr. Pethy, thank you for covering. Lisa and Randy, thank you for taping this and so our citizens can see it. City Manager, thank you for making this meeting happen today. And the board, thank you again for your attentiveness and hard work. And I hope you all have a blessed Memorial Day weekend. We'll have a resolution, and we will do that at our June meeting to vote. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. By Mr. Allen, and then seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.